Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another CareNext Collective presented to you by Manulife Canada. Before I introduce today's exciting topic and an amazing speaker that we have for you, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. We're keeping both our chat and Q&A functions open. Please use chat for comments, observations, and anything you may want to share, and we do strongly encourage you to engage with us. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout. We will be paying attention to those and pulling them in and bringing them to our speaker. Our community manager, Carissa, is keeping an eye on the questions tab, and she will be engaging with you throughout. So over the past several months, we've explored in-depth artificial intelligence from multiple perspectives. So from governance and responsible adoption to clinical implementation and the evolving role of patients in AI-enabled care. And across all these conversations, one theme continues to emerge. The biggest barrier to AI is rarely the technology itself. Organizations can purchase technology, they can hire consultants, they can launch pilots, yet many still struggle to translate those investments into meaningful, sustainable transformation. Why? Because AI is ultimately an organizational challenge. It asks us to rethink how decisions are made, how data is used, how teams work together, how leaders lead, and how organizations learn and adapt. Healthcare has always been a data-intensive industry, yet many of our systems continue to treat data as a byproduct of care rather than as a strategic asset capable of improving decisions, accelerating learning, and transforming how care is delivered. So today's conversation is about that transformation. Rather than asking which AI tools should we adopt, we're going to explore a more fundamental question. What organizational capabilities distinguish organizations that successfully adapt from those that struggle to move beyond isolated initiatives? So to help us explore this important question, I'm delighted to welcome Matt Fisher. Matt is a Senior Vice President of Software Engineering and Technology at Miovision, where he leads initiatives that drive organizational transformation through technology, innovation, and operational excellence. With more than 20 years of leadership experience across organizations, including BlackBerry, D2L, and now Miovision, Matt has worked at the intersection of strategy, technology, and execution, helping organizations scale, navigate change, and build capabilities that enable long-term success. So what makes Matt's perspective particularly valuable for healthcare is that his experience extends well beyond technology implementation. His work demonstrates how leadership, organizational design, culture, governance, and operational discipline come together to create an environment where innovation can thrive. So Matt, thank you for joining us today and welcome to CareNext Collective. So Matt, I'd like to begin with Miovision itself because understanding your journey provides important context for the rest of our discussion. So for those who may not be familiar with Miovision, can you tell us a little bit about the company, what problems does it solve, and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say thank you, Danina and the CareNext team for having me. I think this is a wonderful conversation, and I love this forum that you built for open conversation. You know, I know as we get into some of the AI topics, there might be a hesitancy to raise your hand or ask a question. I think, you know, coming from me, there's no silly questions, so hopefully we see lots of good engagement here. So Miovision, at the heart of it, we're an intelligent mobility company. So what that means is, you know, it's really mission driven. It's about focusing on improving the lives of citizens. You know, we do this through our sets of products, and we're uniquely positioned. We're a Canadian company in that we have both hardware and software. We have a hardware product, mobility product, and a permanent product that gets installed in intersections in the cities that we operate. It's an IoT device, so that's an Internet of Things device. So think of that component being installed here in the region. The region is a customer. So at the traffic lights in the region, you'll notice there's a gray box. Inside that gray box is Miovision technology that, you know, connects to the controller and collects a bunch of data. And that data gets pushed to an application that our customers have access to and allows them to manage effectively the city network. And our CEO tells his kids that effectively he builds a time machine because, funny enough, a lot of this infrastructure was really offline. Much of it didn't exist in the cloud. There was no connectivity. So we're really bringing that connectivity onto the internet and into the cloud. Beyond the traditional sort of traffic management, we also have a V2X line of business, which stands for vehicle to anything. And so we take traffic insights and we actually push those down into the vehicle. Audi is a customer. So if you have an Audi and you're driving an Audi, there are other OEMs that we're potentially looking at, but Audi in the family of the group of companies, you would see speed advisory and red light assist, which is really interesting. So at sort of the nexus of it, it's really Miovision is a data company that collects data from IoT sensors. We use an application to give solutions to our customers, and most of those customers are cities, regions, states, provinces, and those customers are really focused on outcomes. So when you think about trying to solve a problem, it's congestion. Everyone knows about traffic congestion. It's safety. It's how are people passing through crosswalks, effectively. It's really around preemption. So we have a product that offers preemption for police, fire, ambulance, transit, and this is done at different scales. We do this at the intersection scale, so you can think of this as local. We do it at the corridor scale, so perhaps why is King Street and Kitchener not timed correctly? And we can do it at the network scale. We can look at the network scale at city scale. So what I've learned from joining Miovision is certainly this idea of traffic is on everyone's mind. If you attend a party, you're at a family event, the first two things people tend to ask you is, how's the traffic getting here? And second, how's the weather? And so traffic is really this, fundamental tenet that's in all our lives. And so really that's Miovision, our journey. Our journey, we started in Kitchener-Waterloo, our founder, Curtis McBride. We're about 20 years old. Our 21st anniversary is this year. And so really proud to be a Canadian technology company based in the region here. And really focused on, outcomes similar to what, you talked about in the opening around healthcare professionals and how they're thinking about improving care and improving care of the folks that they serve.
Wonderful. So would it be correct to assume that you, other than considering yourself a data company, also consider yourself a technology company?
100%, 100%. And I think, I would say when you think of what we do fundamentally, we take data, we collect data, we make it useful to our customers, and we're certainly a tech company. That's our roots, is where we sort of founded. We actually came through the Accelerator Center. Our CEO was part of the Accelerator program, is the Community Tech program here regionally. And we always like to think of, we've been at the nexus of innovation. We offer a camera, a 360 camera that goes in intersections. It uses what I would call OGAI, computer vision. So before AI was a buzzword, it uses computer vision to identify pedestrians and vehicles and help cities actually adapt the lights in their network to build safer, better outcomes for their communities.
Technology companies live and die by their ability to adapt. What have been the biggest transformations Miovision has undergone during your time there?
Yeah, I would say for us, when we think about, the transformation we've gone through, in early startup days, it's a lot about delivering tools and delivering capabilities. I would say one of our fundamental thinking was around how do we enable the business to be quicker? So, being 20 years old, we, started with SaaS. So you hear a lot of people going to the cloud or being SaaS based. We were SaaS native. I have a cool story where 18 years ago, when we were procuring AWS in the cloud, they didn't even have a console. We actually had to call a 1-800 number to procure their services. So the neat thing is we kind of jumped, we leapfrogged that idea of having, on-prem infrastructure and on-prem capabilities. The second thing I would say is we started to really think about data. And we started to think about, obviously we have product data for the products I described, our hardware, our software products, and we have data that exists as part of running the business, whether that be finance data, whether it be HR data. And so several years ago, we started thinking about, first of all, we need to make sure we really combine all our data. And mostly on the business side, let's combine all our data. Let's make sure it's accessible. We can deliver reports. We can deliver actions to folks internally in the business. And then second, in another kind of data set, we were actually building out the ability to collect product data. And so 2.5 years ago, we started on this journey of what if we combine these data sets into a common technology layer? And how would we do that? So we started to think about the governance and the permissioning and all of the controls that go with such an activity. And for the first time this year in January 2026, we actually have all Miovision data in a single data store, a single technology stack, governed, permissioned. And what that does for us from a technology company is really starts to unlock an immense amount of power, immense amount of ability for us to look into that data, to have insights, to have abilities to report on that data. And I think if you're following kind of the AI trend or the AI hype trend, there's a lot of focus on let's build it, let's procure AI. And I love you kicked off with saying this isn't a tool conversation, which I love that. It's really about how do you build foundational layers to enable AI. And I think, I read this neat article, last week, that talked a lot about when people start on an AI journey, they feel like 50% of the work is data and 50% of the work is the AI tooling, where in fact it's 80-90% is actually on the data side, and 10 to 20% is on the AI tooling side. So once all that data was combined here at Miovision, we spent a lot of time thinking about views. And for people who maybe aren't technical, a view is just you have your raw data and you take data and you combine it. So maybe if I think of finance data, you might have a P&L or an expense table where you're combining data. And then once you have those views, there's this new concept called semantics. And semantics really just means I use natural language to describe the data. So I'd say this field, this is the expense field that's used for expenses, or this is the department field. At REN, this describes the department inside the hospital network. And then once you have those views and those semantics, you can start to layer AI on top. And my goodness, that's when the magic sort of happens. Alternatively, what happens sometimes is people start with AI and they realize the responses, the outcomes they're getting aren't really driving what they're thinking or meet their expectation. And so now they have to go back and go focus on that foundational layer. So I'd say for us, from an experience of Miovision, being a tech company, heavily rooted in data and innovation from the ground up, we started really thinking about data foundations, where our data exists, combining our data. And I would say that's your table stakes. That's the first thing. But then how do you turn that data into actionable insights? And once you've turned that data into actionable insights, then now you can power it with, innovative AI solutions on top of that data.
How important has leadership alignment been throughout that journey, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely huge. I would say, we have this philosophy here at Miovision that we've started in this new agentic world of everybody's a builder. So we say, we put this on all our posters. I have slides that say everyone's a builder. And so, when you think about leadership alignment here, specifically in this transformation that we're going through, the world's going through, making sure you have leadership alignment, but you also have grassroots alignment. And I think, I have lots of colleagues that I talk to in the space. There's one model where, a CEO or a president hires a consulting firm, and, they implement an AI program that gets pushed out to the organization. That can have success. But it's really tough when, leadership isn't kind of bought in and you don't have people, participating in that model. Here at Miovision, from the CEO down to executive to people leaders to ICs, there's a pretty strong alignment around where we're going with AI. Certainly, we can't predict the future and the tools and the tech and sort of the models. And this idea of everyone's a builder, in that data sense, we try to unlock and democratize data so that everybody has access. So our CEO can access and query data as simply as someone in finance, as simply as someone in engineering. And you see a real shift in the organization when data isn't behind. And again, obviously it's permissioned. This doesn't mean someone can go look up, pay data, or someone can go look up particular sensitive data. But if it's data that, helps us run our business, why not let people have access to the data that helps them move quicker, make decisions? And so you find in a business, when you start to do these types of changes from a process perspective, instead of the time being spent on the process to get the outcome, you actually are focused on doing the work, because the ability to go get the actionable insights is so quick. You can do it almost near real time.
Tanya's asking, how do you ensure that the data is good data? There is so much misinformation out there now. And I do encourage, I saw someone raise their hand. They do encourage the audience to please use the chat function to ask your questions. So back to Tanya's question, how do you ensure that the data is good data?
Oh my goodness. Great question. I love this. So I would say there's twofold. One, you want to try to the degree you can in the source system. So let's pick on, a system that's everyone can relate to. Let's pick Salesforce. So Salesforce is a system where data arrives. They're selling data, opportunity data from our sales team. Today, that data flows into our data warehouse. And so, there might be gaps in the data. It might be incorrect. Much as you can at that source system to make your master data management flow from source system into your data store. You can do that through controls. You can do that through education. You can do that through, you can't click save until these fields are filled out. You can do validation. It's going to be really, really, really hard to make sure it's absolutely perfect. And so what we've started to do is, I talked about this idea of you bring your data in, and we're calling it raw data. So you have raw data. And what we don't let people generally do is interact with the raw data, because the raw data, remember, it's not connected. It doesn't have semantics. It doesn't have insights. So we take that raw data and we actually build intelligence on top of the data. And that intelligence exists in views. So I talked about views combining data, semantics. So we twofold. We try and fix it before it comes in. And when it comes in, we try to think about ways that we actually make the data more usable, and we make the data work for the business need. So if I use Salesforce on an opportunity in our Salesforce application, there's like 200 fields. If there's a particular use case someone in sales is trying to do, likely 200 fields is too much for that view. What is they're trying to achieve? What's the data? And so describing a small subset of that data, and we're actually enabling now the business. We have a data team, but in more recent quarters, we're letting the business go in and build these dynamic tables and build these semantics, because remember, they're the subject matter experts on this data. So it's peculiar for the data team to go do this. So, I have a great example where HR has been participating in some data work literally just a couple of weeks ago, and they are in, like, HR business partner is in our data tool, building views and semantic layers as part of our AI enablement program.
When did AI move from being an interesting technology to something with strategic implications from Miovision?
Yeah, I would say I have this neat slide where I talk about kind of in late 24, we started to implement and play with, which many did, predominantly AI inside of engineering, software engineering. And the dream was this idea of, we could build source code with AI. And the first evolutions of those was really just completing a line of code. So you would start typing a line of code and it would autocomplete. And really you saw this condensing of rapid innovation. So we went from completing lines of code to kind of late in 2.4, there being sort of first generations names you would have heard of, like Cloud Code, Cursor, some of these early innovation tools. And in 2025, we started to take a serious look at, like, okay, you'd go on and you're reading articles, you're meeting people, and there's a lot of talk about AI development. And so we started playing with these tools inside our own software engineering team. And I would say it was kind of mid-year last year where things really started to shift, where, it was novel and we're running experimentation and sort of experimental pods, to realizing that the tooling that was being built and the pace of innovation with these models was fundamentally shifting not only how we would work, how we would build, but we're just having massive impacts on anyone who builds software. So we started to do sort of a more tailored rollout to everyone in software engineering mid-year, with the focus on leveraging this tool to really give you, we call it superpowers. Like, how do you get superpowers with this AI? And how do you actually, it's really an accelerant of what you can deliver. And I would say across software engineering now in 26, everyone's using AI. Many of our products, or some of our products, are completely built with AI. We talk a little bit about, AI for AI, some of our testing.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously want to test. So like as you build more code, you need to test
Mm-hmm.
more. We have AI-driven tests, AI-driven deployments. So I would say early 2.4 was kind of when we started playing around with this at scale. And then in 2.5, kind of wall-to-wall in engineering. And in late 2.5 and now into 26, we're thinking, engineering is on a really great path around what they're doing with AI. And now we're bringing it back to the business. So what are we doing in, finance? What are we doing in sales and marketing? And what are we doing in HR? And how do we think about, those teams, the people, the business processes, the data
Mm-hmm.
to really bring an AI first mindset and
Mm-hmm.
thinking to the broader organization beyond, just technology and engineering teams.
Mm-hmm. So Carissa's going to push the first audience poll right now. And while she's in the process of doing that, Matt, looking back, what decisions positioned Miovision well for where we are today?
Yeah, I would say, certainly technology. I think be remiss if you don't kind of have an architecture plan and a technology plan. If you read on this topic, tool proliferation, you get a bit of whiplash between, Gemini model to Claude model to OpenAI model, and which model's better than which model and which tool should I be using. Certainly there is some science in using the right tooling. I want to make sure I make that clear. But I think it's this idea of the people aspect of the transformation. And I think you kicked off by alluding to sometimes it's either skipped or it's accelerated. And for us, we've really thought hard about, AI for all. We
Mm-hmm.
this could be very much just a thing we do in engineering and we leave it
Mm-hmm.
there. That's not how we're thinking about it. We're really thinking about how do we enable the entire company to have those superpowers that engineers feel. And,
Mm-hmm.
in some degree, when you look at AI today, AI is the best at the things that people hate to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you think about in your job, you're just spending 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, and, 4 of those is doing kind of monotonous things, summarizing for a report, et cetera, et cetera. AI is really great at that stuff. And so you think of kind of the human impact of this, and this is about shifting the work that you do to be more of the creative type of work and the work that, is more value add than sort of the moving of data around, right? And I think for us that's been a big piece is like tooling matters, but let's think about the impact it has on the teams and what team structures look like. What is team? What is organization? What is an organization? What do structures look like? Does that maintain in kind of this AI world? I would say one slide that we show, I have a slide that talks about kind of the phases of AI. And phase one, we talk a lot about here at Miovision. And phase one is really the accelerant. So everyone here has probably used ChatGPT or Claude, and that phase of phase one is about just using an AI tool. You use it, and I'm faster. I'm faster at doing my work. Phase two starts to be like, how do I get agents working for me asynchronously? So that phase one is like, I'm only as fast as me. I ask GPT, GPT responds. I ask Claude, Claude responds. I ask Gemini. Phase two becomes, I give an agent a task, it operates and goes and executes on a plan. Checks in, it's my plan, but it operates kind of without me. And what we've realized is in phase one, you see a ton of productivity gains, tons. So you improve productivity. But what you're doing is taking business processes from 10, 15, 20 years ago and optimizing them. And in phase two, you really have to think about first principles thinking of like, if I could go back to the drawing board and I could forget all of this, how would I redesign this from the ground up with AI? And that is actually a very hard problem. That is a harder people problem than it is a
Yeah.
tooling problem.
Yeah.
And I think no matter what tool you buy, that's not going to kind of help you solve that. You
Mm-hmm.
need subject matter experts. In our business,
Mm-hmm.
it's traffic. In your business, it's healthcare professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And, that context of being a healthcare professional for 10, 15 years, that's like the most important thing. That context is so important. When I talk about context in the data, people have personal context. I have personal context from my career, of the things I've done. You do as well. And so do the people listening. And applying that context to think about how we redesign, we build kind of from first principles, that to me is the most powerful part.
Mm. Yeah, we've asked our audience what they think the greatest barriers are, and quite a few of them said technology. Technology often receives the greatest
Yes.
attention, but I suspect today's discussion may challenge some of those assumptions.
I,
Healthcare organizations,
if I
yeah,
could just jump
please.
in there, Dina,
Mm-hmm,
for a second, I
please
think
do.
I would say one thing that, you know, I would expect technology. It's not surprising to me. People said technology. I have this really cool slide from it's AI generated because you can't have an AI presentation with an AI slide. And it's Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones from Men in Black. If you remember the Men in
Mm-hmm.
Black movie, when they would see the aliens, they'd pull out a neuralizer and
Yeah.
they'd zap people and they'd forget their memory. And so often when I kick off an AI presentation, I show this slide of Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith neuralizing humans for their business processes. And I think the technology comes up a lot because the technology is built to be so open, and we live in a world that's fairly defined, right? No matter what you've been doing, you're rooted in your past, you're rooted in how you
Mm-hmm.
do it. And so to this group, for this conversation, and when you go back into your jobs, the challenge is, can you neuralize yourself, the team, and can you kind of, you don't need to forget, but how do you think about this in a new way? And that kind of thinking isn't easy because you're going to be rooted in going back to the way you've always thought about it, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
why, I'm not surprised technology actually comes up as the number one barrier.
I mean, healthcare organizations often begin with the technology, right? So I think this is a great segue to organizational capabilities that need to exist before technology can create value. So if you had to define organizational readiness, Matt, in one sentence, what would it be?
Yeah, one sentence, I would say it's two things. I think, and maybe it may sound simple and obvious. I think it's resiliency. You think of the pace and rate of change. It is impossible to operate in the new agentic world without being
Mhm.
resilient. And I would say open to change. For
Mhm.
many folks who've been in a career, uh, you've your definition, me as a person, my self-worth, my ownership, all those things get kind of bucketed
Mhm.
into what I do, how I do it. And so to me, when you think about organizational capabilities, those are some of the things we're trying to build here, to build safe places that,
Mhm.
if you did X and X is going away and now there's Y, what does that look like? And I think, that's certainly not a technology thing. That's really a people thing. And I think
Mhm.
the organizations that will totally embrace this kind of agentic movement will be the ones that, built resiliency into the organization, not a team or a
Mhm.
function into the organization, and are open to change. And that open to change looks like, the thing I did yesterday, maybe I have an AI doing or an agent doing, but like there's this other thing. And this ability to let go, but also this ability to think and dream. I talked a bit about, how people, the excitement of all this is how I can focus more of my time on creative endeavors and sort of dreaming a bit more. And I think, that comes from that organizational perspective, really thinking about resiliency and change.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, in your view, what comes first? Strategy, data, culture, governance, or does it depend?
Yeah, I think you have to have a strategy. If you don't have a
Mhm.
strategy, I think you don't know where you're going for sure. Uh, and again, some of the other things, governance, tooling, you need those. We've certainly found you can get caught up in a bit of analysis paralysis. So,
Mhm.
I'm certainly not preaching that, we throw out the process, but we started this idea at Miovision where we do these missions. And so for 30 days, we put them on a mission. They get to leave their kind of daily job and they go onto a mission for 30 days and they're protected by leadership. And we're running an AI mission right now on a bunch of capabilities we're trying to add. And there's a bunch of folks that get to leave their jobs and they go on this mission. And 9 to 5, that's all they focus on.
Mhm.
And it's this idea of, going to discover the unknown. And we're 6 days into this mission. And, each day we do a demo and our CEO
Mhm.
comes, some leaders come. And I was just having a conversation earlier today around if we had spent time, everyone, when you take people out of their job and put them into this sort of capability, this mission, people want to know, what are you going to build? What's the ROI? What are you going to work on? And it's really hard to, say, you got to trust us a little bit here. And so the things that we've delivered and we built in 5 days are absolutely like astonishing. If you asked me 5 days ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what we were building. And so it's this idea of there is a little bit of you need to do to understand what is possible and the capabilities. I absolutely think you need a strategy. So we have a North Star of a bunch of capabilities we're trying to add. And so we're pointed towards those. The road to those items on the North Star can be a bit windy. It doesn't have to be a direct line, but I think giving people the space to actually go do, try, experiment, try new tools. We gave them some new tools we don't use. I think that's really profound. I think it's profound. And I would say, part of all of this is, you hear AI stories that are a little bit doom and gloom, which, I don't subscribe to that. I think that's one view. And in talking to this team on this AI mission, I've never seen people having so much fun and enjoying work so much. We brought cross-functional people into this mission, HR people. One of the people on the mission from Miovision posted on LinkedIn on Friday and said, "Hey, I've been pulled into this AI mission. I've spent X number of years here, and I've never had so much fun at work building and creating."
Why do you think that is, Matt? What about it makes it fun?
Well, I think, I think back to, when you're a child and you're playing, how cool is it when you get given a white canvas and you have this ability to create anything? For many of us, you come into an organization and you're told, the process to buy a new laptop, to get a new laptop, you submit a ticket. The process, you don't have a lot of ability to say, I see inefficiencies in whatever this is. There's a process for approval on X, do Y, I need to do X. And so it's kind of neat when you give people the ability to just go build and break. And again, we have to decide which of that comes back to the organization. They don't get to just blow up Miovision business processes. But I think that's really exciting. This ability that you feel empowered, you have support, and I think you have time. I think the other thing in this world where everyone's kind of working on everything and people feel stretched thin, this ability to say you have 30 days and and we call it mission purposely. You're on this mission, and in our internal communications tool, people put a little mission badge. So if someone has a little mission badge, you can't talk to them because they're off on the mission solving for the next round of innovation. And so, to me, it was funny. We do this daily sync with the team. And last week we flew them all into headquarters here. And I would be in the room having conversations with the mission team. And then I'd leave the mission, I'd be having conversations with the rest of the business. And the different conversations and people in the mission and people out of the mission, the contrast was stark. And I think the back to your point of organizational readiness, the challenge is how do you take excitement from in the mission and make that become kind of across the organization?
So parts of that to me really speak of the importance of good governance, right?
Yes.
What do you see in your mind's eye when you hear good governance? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, for us, governance is at all layers. Governance for us starts even, and I would say as you start to think about AI, some of the traditional governance, security, permission mindset you have gets kind of blown up. I'll give an example where you asked what innovation were we doing in engineering. And so I recall back, this is back into 2.5, our engineers were using this new tool we bought for software development with AI. And so I was hearing all these wild stories. And so I installed the tool on my machine, and I started playing around with it and was able to build some pretty, impressive technology. And then I was showing our CEO and said, I want to kind of show you what I built. And then he was like, I want this. And he starts building. But right away, he bumps into I don't have permissions to do access and permissions to why I can't access X system. CEO can't access it because we have permission to role-based access. And so you see quickly, as we talked about foundational data, this idea of foundational governance becomes super, super important in this world of AI because you have agents and humans starting to kind of span multiple systems, multiple data sets, multiple access. What can they access? And so for us, we're really heavily leaning into what's called our back rule-based access security. And so the technology team's partnering heavily with HR around how do we make sure we try to make this as seamless as possible. So if I'm using an agent or an AI, and every time I hit a wall, I have to go submit a ticket to get access, a lot of my time is caught up in kind of permissions and data access. And there might be things that I very well could just have permission to. It's not even sensitive. And for many reasons, we're ISO and SOC certified. You need to show approval and who approved and who requested and where was the approval. So we're really trying to think of, again, back to first principles. Instead of just automating the approval step, how do we think about giving people the right level of access for their job and what they're doing and enabling them with some of this data? So for us, governance is all layers. It's governance across the board. And it's even governance of, like, we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about, the type of AI products we use, what's approved, what's not approved, sharing that with employees, because, there's the Samsung example last year where someone was using OpenAI and they put source code into OpenAI and, some source code leaked. So there's ideas around, IP protection from things that are core to your business. And that comes in twofold. It's education, partnering with our security team around how we tell that story and why it's important to use our Miovision AI or the procured, like we procure enterprise versions of AI products, because there's protection around those for the assets that Miovision owns. So yeah, it's access, it's security, it's the data layer, it's how people interact, it's all of those systems. And I think in some ways, it's not just taking the model you have and extending it. You have to kind of, back to my philosophy of, like, if you can be neuralized and you think about, you have, for every Mac, you have 10 agents running around. How do those agents and me sort of become one and the same?
How has organizational structure evolved in Miovision as AI has entered your organization?
Yeah, I would say, like, we're thinking a lot about org structure for sure. I'll give you an example. So I talk about phase one being, more productive. Phase two kind of being this idea of agents, using agents more. There is a phase three that I didn't talk about, and bear with me a second. We kind of go into dreamland a little bit here, and this is the world where agents reside in the org chart. This is where our digital friends and our human friends interact together. So I would say we're working with HR right now where, agents that we're building for Miovision have names, role descriptions, they have air quote salaries, and that salary is tokens. Agents are fueled by tokens, tokens through OpenAI, tokens through Claude, and, tokens can have an extreme cost. So, if I have an agent doing a task, I want to know it's less than, $2,000 a month or less than $700 a month, whatever the task is. And so these are some of the future concepts we're leaning into around how do you marry this idea of, agents and humans. And back to your point, it's very much governance focused. I remember a really great conversation with one of the operational leaders from OpenAI back in late 24, where they were working on some of these concepts then, and they didn't attach agents to people. And when people would leave, they would have these kind of agents roaming around. And so you may see in the org chart, Matt Fisher's in the org chart and there's an agent reports to me, so on and so forth. But that's for good reason, because if Matt leaves, you look at Matt's employees and Matt's agents and where should they be and who should kind of have ownership of them. And again, back to access rights, it's really important to make sure access and control is done in a way that organizations are people, and we get access to people through tools and systems. And we're kind of thinking of the same thing for our digital friends as well as humans.
In that world, in Miovision world, do traditional hierarchies become a limitation?
Yeah, I think about, I spend a bunch of time in large enterprise where, you kind of had to go up the hierarchy and down. I would say fundamentally, here as a culture, that's not necessarily the case. If someone needs to get to somebody, they reach out to them. I think you're asking a fundamental question, like what is a team? What is a organization? And I would say, we are certainly seeing the early signs that work becomes blurred, right? Because I give you the ability to use an agentic tool. It's sitting on top of our data. Let's just say you've never done financial reporting, and now all of a sudden there's all these great financial assets in our data set, and you have an AI. You can produce kind of financial reports for yourself and your business however you want. So you start to see this kind of blurring of, you're certainly not in finance and you're not doing FP&A work, but you're kind of dabbling in there. And so again, this stuff is evolving very quickly. I wouldn't say we solved it, but we're certainly thinking about what does that mean, right? And how do we think about that? Because, going back to giving people superpowers, we're trying to make sure we enable people the most we can securely with the data they should have access to. And you see, like, those who are using kind of our newest tool set, you will see that their ability to get data and decisions is like instantaneous. And you will find that, like, I see this new trend of like an almost impatientness because they're so used to just being able to ask and get it right away. There's no, like, you submit a ticket and it goes to somebody and somebody and somebody and it comes back in a week. They're used to being able to ask a question, and within, a minute, 2 minutes, I have my answer. So yeah, I think to your point, do hierarchies and evolution, do those evolve? I think they're going to evolve. I think it would be hard pressed to have a business where kind of just everybody's flat. Perhaps that might work, but you're certainly seeing startups. If you go look at sort of startup culture, the sub 10, sub 15, and talk to some of the co-founders and leaders of those organizations, they're thinking completely differently because, I talked about when Miovision was founded, we jumped through this on-prem info. We went right to cloud. When you talk to startup leaders now, and you talk about us having SaaS base and we're in the cloud, they're thinking of a whole new revolution of kind of springboarding into agentic first.
How do you avoid creating AI as a separate function rather than embedding it into the organization?
Yeah, I think first you need to have someone that's championing it for sure. You need a single back to governance model. If everybody's just doing everything, you don't have a strategy. So you asked, do we start with strategy? Do we start with the tech? Where do we start? You need a strategy. I think it's certainly okay to have teams experiment and have teams try different things. We have a couple groups in engineering right now testing a bunch of new technology. That's totally cool. I think you should encourage that. But I think you need to be very careful that you don't create Frankenstein. Back in my BlackBerry days, we used to talk about shadow IT. You want to make sure you don't have, shadow AI popping up through the organization. And I think that creates more problems than benefit, right? If you have people circumventing kind of the process, the procurement of these tools, the security governance. And so you need that centralized for sure. But you also need to make sure you don't make it top down. I think, we talked a little bit about it. It's got to be grassroots and it's got to be top down. So to the degree you have a strategy, that's amazing. But I think you have to be really careful to make sure you don't stifle innovation by, forcing it through, lots of ideas through a very single pipe. And so that's this balancing act. So we're, in the AI mission we're working on a way that safely, securely on Miovision build technology, people can innovate and innovate in a way that has controls, and they can use the tools that are available to them in an almost unlimited, unbounded way, which we're really excited about because that doesn't exist today.
So Carissa is going to push our second poll now to the audience. In the meantime, Matt, if you walked into a new organization tomorrow, what are 3 things that you would assess before talking about AI?
Yeah, I think, as much as we talk about technology, we are a people organization, and people drive organizations. I was at a talk for a company recently, a few weeks ago, and the CEO stood on stage and said, AI doesn't work. We're priding ourselves on not using AI here at this particular organization. And he said, we are the most secure because we don't use AI. So I think, certainly the thinking, the leadership team, the vision, the strategy is heavily going to impact and influence kind of what you're doing. I think, back to, what builds this resilience and openness to change. If that particular gentleman, if, you spoke to him after and said, counterpoint why I think you're, some counterpoints of, well, particularly look at this different perspective. And they said, oh, this is really interesting, I'm going to take that away. That's different than I've made my decision, we're just not using AI. So I would say it's certainly, you need to think about that leadership cone, right? Because organizations start to model and exemplify the thoughts and behaviors of their leaders. So I think leadership is certainly key. And I think it's this idea of how open and willingness are they to think differently. This is, again, it's not a tooling issue. How are you thinking differently about driving change in your organization? And to some degree, I think readiness, like technology readiness. We talked a lot about, tools and systems. Have you digitized? Are things digital? Are they digital on-prem? Are they digital in the cloud? Are they digital in the cloud in one system, multiple systems? So, to me, I'd really think about that people layer of people and leaders. I would really think about that culture and resilience and change. And third, kind of your scorecard on technology readiness, because that's going to really impact how much change you actually need to do to start to adopt some of these philosophies.
Well, so our audience, like almost half of the people say governance, and then the rest is divided between leadership, culture, and workforce skills. Which sort of leads us to the our next segment. Technology changes quickly, organizations change much more slowly. So ultimately, transformation is about people. And you already alluded to this in your previous answer. What leadership behaviors become more important during transformation? And certainly something like AI enablement.
I would say, there's, I don't want to sound like a broken record. I think resilience and change for sure. I said this earlier, but I can't emphasize this enough, is this, like, everyone's a builder. I think, I tell that story of when I, tried to push code into our repository and I got the tooling, and then I showed our CEO and he got the tooling. And there's something special about when all levels of leadership are participating in the change. So it could be anything. It could be a new tool that rolled out. It could be, we put all our data into this cloud-based AI product, and we had them on site as part of this mission last week to show us the newest and greatest in that tool. And so there's a particular person from, it's cross-functional, there's a particular person from HR, and said, in the Tuesday afternoon, I'm going to leave because I don't think this pertains to me. I said, everyone's a builder, you should stay. And so that person 4 days ago had never logged into the tool, and yesterday at the demo had built semantic views and built an app, again, in a sandbox area. And so this idea of, you're hitting on it with a hierarchy, but this idea of hierarchy is, it's really hard to stand up in front of the company and talk about change and talk about where we're going when you don't actually engage and use the tools. So I think there's this idea where, certainly in a technology company, in a leadership role, you would look at what percentage is my leadership capacity, what percentage is my technical capacity. And we're seeing this in our business, and we're seeing this in other businesses, that those leaders need to be a bit more technical. And that means, like, I'm running an engineering environment on my machine. And if you asked me 2 years ago if I thought I'd be running a dev environment on my machine, and again, am I a developer? No. I'm a moonlighting, or I'm a recovering engineer. But the idea that I have it on my machine, I can pull down code, I can look, I can use our AI product, I can ask questions. I have a one-on-one with my team. I can, I'm dangerous enough to do things, but I'm not actually doing the work. And I think that is a paramount shift of, like, as things speed and the pace picks up, it's really hard to understand and have context if you're not really aware of the current environment and the current kind of tool set.
How do you encourage? Because what I sense behind what you're talking about now, and when you talk about your mission teams, is a sort of a culture of experimentation. How do you encourage experimentation while maintaining accountability?
Yeah, I think you have to be, so we, I should have brought some of these slides, but I have this great slide that says and this is stolen from anyone who games, and, lots of engineers here love gaming, but in many games, there's like a main quest your day job and there's the side quest. And we ask people a lot of time to go explore this, look at this, change this business process. And that many times is the side quest that's on top of your daily 9 to 5, what you're working on. And so this idea of mission or innovation pods, other companies call them, or incubation pods, it's this idea of being super intentional about giving time. And I have this great slide that says, we're taking the side quest and we're making it the main quest for 30 days. Because it's really, really hard for you to live in this duality zone where I'm doing my job and then when I have time off the side of my desk. And so I think you have to be super intentional. You have to be super intentional to say, if we're going to go innovate in this space, we need subject matter experts. We need to bring someone from HR. And again, don't think about it as a technology change. In this AI mission is HR. HR is in there. You have business people, you have technologists, and all together, they together are working on this change. And I think that is the secret sauce, is like intentionality, giving them space and making sure it's really cross-functional. Now, I mentioned there's kind of the discussion in the room, there's discussion out of the room. Outside of the room, there's people obviously running the business and doing the things they need to do. And given the number of people, it's a pretty small investment at the scale of Miovision. We're not talking, hundreds of people on this quest here, like a handful. And I think that, that drives energy to that team. It drives thoughtful leadership, all this kind of stuff. And then they come back and they start to influence the organization because they're coming back with these new learnings from the quest, right?
One thing that AI seems to have done across many domains, and this is a question I get asked very often, is the technology going to displace people? So how do you build confidence in your team? And because, we've heard of companies that have let go of thousands and thousands of employees, presumably because they have brought AI in. So how do you build that confidence? And what's your view on AI replacing humans?
Yeah, so I certainly believe AI is going to replace some of the mundane pieces of our job. I mentioned this a couple of times. Here at Miovision, we certainly don't believe AI and AI adoption is going to replace humans. I use the word superpowers and acceleration. I think it's certainly going to give you superpowers, and I think we saw that first in engineering, and you're going to start to see that at scale. We're seeing it in pockets. You're going to see that in scale into Q3 and Q4 and other teams. And again, I think if you think about the organization of humans and agents, if you can really scale an organization, whether it be revenue, whether it be care-based outcomes, with the set of people you're doing today and deliver better care outcomes or deliver better revenue or deliver better gross margin with the people you have, because I don't know anyone that tells me they have nothing to do. When I talk to anyone in any job, I don't care if it's public health or if it's, private, corporate, no one's saying, today I'm twiddling my thumbs and I'm looking for things to do. Everyone has a long backlist. And I think it's this idea of how do you leverage the tools in tech to do, first of all, the simple things and give you that acceleration. And I would say, people ask this question all the time. We really believe in this. We believe in, there's been no, changes in our headcount based upon AI, those sorts of things. And we really believe we're going to come through this journey or as part of this journey and be a stronger organization that's focused on, the outcomes that we're trying to deliver for our customers, which is, driving things for cities.
But it sounds like the jobs are changing as people are in them. So how do you prepare people for jobs that are changing in real time?
Yeah. So I would say in some of this, like, remember, we were on this AI mission, what did I say, 5 days, 5 days of building. It started last Monday. Some of it is doing, like, when you talk about HR building technology, like if you asked me last Monday, did I think the HR representation in our AI mission was going to build applications and semantic views, I might have chuckled a bit, but that's reality, right? And I think, this is where this true partnership with, HR and your teams, that's why they're part of the mission. They're part of the mission because, as you start to lean into these tools and tech, you start to get into uncharted territory, right? Like that person who we're enabling with superpowers, we like to think of it as a T. Generally, you have someone who has a job that has deep technical knowledge, but they're starting to get sort of cross-functional capabilities now with the technology that they're embracing because the capabilities, the data backbone that we've built, which is super empowering. But to your point, like, is it HR plus? Like, what does that look like? And I would say we're solving this together. If I told you we had a silver bullet in the answers, that's certainly not true. But I think it's this idea of, I mentioned you got to try and you got to do, and we're really trying to lean into this, innovative future. We believe that, this is a huge opportunity for, you think of RAN and the constituents and the communities and the people that you serve, and also for us as our customers of, think of the ability to innovate our technical roadmap, our products, the outcomes that we deliver. And if we can do that at scale and solve all of this together, remove sort of that skunk work project that people don't love and have people be happier and work on things that add value, to me, that's a win-win-win across the board. And is the path to that well charted and there's a playbook? Absolutely not. But I think, that's why these conversations of,
That's so important.
what are we doing and what are others doing and how are we thinking about it? I think that's why this makes this so important at this time.
Yeah. And throughout this conversation, I've been thinking about healthcare and, how can you, because so many challenges that you described, they're challenges, and then so many things, so many decisions that you have made as a company that has enabled you to be where you are, we're struggling to make. And so again, this is why it's so important to be talking to you so we can learn from you. So in these last couple of minutes,
I would say too, on the healthcare side, obviously a tech company and a healthcare organization, there's lots of differences. But, if you strip it all away, I like to think there's more similarities than there are differences. You have an org chart, you have business processes, you collect data. The data is about different things. People go get reports, people are asking questions. And I think, obviously there's more stringent regulation around HIPAA and health-based data. But, many of what we talk about, like many of these concepts are very much transferable, right? And I think, that's the exciting piece is like, I didn't lean into tools specific to us and our space and our size. These are all concepts and working examples. And I think, to the degree anyone listening sees some version of, the Miovision story in their team or their department or wherever they're working, I think and even if they were to leave and ask their leader or their leader's leader, like, what are we doing on, driving innovation in our department? Like those are great questions to leave and kind of ask your teams.
So maybe as a closing question, Matt, because we're almost at time, if you were advising RAN CEOs,
yes,
what would you, like, where would you begin? What would your advice be?
Yeah, I think, it's not too profound, but I think the moment is now. The moment is now. And what I mean by that is you can't wait. And I think if you wait to start, you end up being behind. And this all became super true to me when, I told the story of I get a dev environment, I install things, and I tell our CEO. There was a week after he got access, he's like working, wild hours, and I'm getting messages into the night. And on the Friday, it became apparent to me that those who embrace this get time back, and you're almost extending time. And he had said, Matt, like, if I can do what I was going to do in a month in a day, think of what we can do at scale when the whole company is doing what you used to take a quarter in a week. And I think that kind of like that moment it clicks for you of like, oh my goodness, like we should have started this a month ago. We like the best place, and what is the story? The best time to plant a tree is, a long time ago, except for today. And I think it's that philosophy of, I think you need a plan and you need a strategy. Don't get me wrong, but don't belabor it, because if you don't start, you're going to be waiting. And the most important thing is starting, because if you don't start, someone else is starting for you.
Matt, thank you so much for such a thoughtful discussion. One of the themes I will take away from today's conversation is that organizations don't become AI enabled simply by adopting AI. They become AI enabled by developing leadership and culture and governance and operational discipline and learning capabilities that allow technology to create meaningful value. And healthcare often asks which as I said earlier, technologies we should implement. Today's discussion, I think, reminds us that perhaps the more important question is whether we are building organizations that are capable of continuously learning and adapting and evolving as technology changes around us. So that's the leadership challenge as much as it is a technology challenge. So thank you, Matt, again, for sharing your experience and your insight. And thank you to everyone who joined us throughout this year's CareNext Collective series. These conversations continue to reinforce that the future of healthcare will be shaped not only by new technologies, but by our willingness to rethink how we lead, how we collaborate, and how we transform our organizations. We look forward to continuing these conversations when CareNext Collective returns after the summer. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Manulife Canada, and have a wonderful summer.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Matt.